evening and welcome to Spring Global on Western Spring Television. Now the headlines. Ex-Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu wife Beatrice doctor jailed over organ harvesting. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party rejected by voters in local election. WHO says COVID-19 no longer represents a global health emergency. My name is Tunde Ido. A judge at the UK Central Criminal Court, also known as the Old Bailey, has sentenced former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, and Dr. Obinna Obeta to jail. At a sentencing hearing this afternoon, Ekweremadu was jailed for 9 years and 8 months. His wife Beatrice was sentenced to 4 years and 6 months imprisonment, while Obeta received a 10-year prison term. The sentencing follows their conviction in March for organ trafficking for the Ekweremadu's sick daughter Sonia, who was cleared of any wrongdoing. The jury said Ekweremadu, his wife, and their doctor criminally conspired to bring the 21-year-old Lagos Street trader to London to exploit him for his kidney. The conviction is the first under the UK's Modern Slavery Act 2015.
After the conspiracy to exploit C was thwarted, you continued to try and find another person to be exploited in the same way. As against that, you have no previous convictions, and you are a person of good character.
And news outside Nigeria, Mali's military authorities have announced 18th June as the new date for a referendum on a draft constitution. Government spokesman Colonel Abdullahi Maiga said in a decree on state television this afternoon, said security forces will vote a week earlier. The junta had set the referendum on constitutional changes for 19th March before it was postponed. A new constitution is one of the key steps put in place before the restoration of a civilian government following the ousting of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in 2020. Elections are due to be held in February next year. In the meantime, Burkina Faso's interim president Ibrahim Traoré has said Russia has become a key strategic ally, but denied that Russian mercenaries are supporting Burkinabe forces in their fight against armed groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIL. Ouagadougou's relations with Moscow are in the spotlight as anti-French sentiment rises in parts of the region. In February, the West African country evicted French troops after ending an accord that allowed France to fight armed groups there since 2013. But Captain Traoré, in a rare televised interview, said the departure of the French army does not mean that France is not an ally. He noted that Russia was a major supplier of military equipment and will remain so without giving further details. Western countries have expressed concerns about Russia's increasing sway in the Sahel and nearby regions. In a rather sad development, at least 70 bodies have been recovered following severe flooding in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. There are reports that homes have been flattened by floodwaters and mudslides in Bushushu and Yankubi in the South Kivu province. The governor of the province described it as a catastrophe. In Ituri province, flooding also destroyed more than 1,000 shelters that had been built for people displaced by war. In neighboring Rwanda, at least 130 people have died in floods and landslides in the north and west. Still in Africa, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has arrived in Kenya for an official visit, which will see him hold bilateral talks with President William Ruto and other top government officials. It was guarded that Mr. Scholz will explore cooperation on renewable energy, among other bilateral ties, during his visit to Kenya. On Thursday, Mr. Scholz met the chairman of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki, in Ethiopia and discussed the Sudan conflict. Mr. Faki said there could be no military resolution to the Sudan unrest, while Mr. Scholz expressed his country's support for international effort to end the fighting, Ethiopian media said. Tomorrow, Mr. Scholz is expected to visit Africa's biggest geothermal plant at Lake Naivasha in the geologically active Great Rift Valley, which is key to Kenya's plan to produce green hydrogen. In the United Kingdom, King Charles III, the Prince of Wales, and the Princess of Wales have arrived at the mall for a royal walkabout. The mall will see the royal family and hundreds of troops process down it for the coronation tomorrow. This comes after the king joined a special launch for leaders of the Commonwealth realms, the 14 countries where Charles is monarch, at the palace.
Preparations are underway for the coronation of King Charles on May 6, which will mark the inauguration of a new head of state in the United Kingdom after 70 years. On the day of the ceremony, the king will be crowned alongside Camilla, the queen consort, and a host of other events have been planned. An extra bank holiday has been confirmed on Monday, 8 May, to mark the occasion. It promises to be a weekend of splendor and traditions dating back 1,000 years. Today, London and Windsor will be having parades, crowds, and street parties to mark the coronation. Large crowds of royal fans are expected to flock to central London for the occasion. On Saturday, which is the coronation day, Westminster Abbey will host the coronation service. Crowds are expected along the Mall, Whitehall, and Parliament Square. The viewing areas will be open from 6 a.m. The King's procession from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Abbey will take place before the coronation service, which starts at 11. The service will be followed by the coronation procession from Westminster Abbey to Buckingham Palace. Later in the afternoon, the King and Queen will greet crowds from the Buckingham Palace balcony for the flight past. But while a sense of joy feels palpable for many, 64% of Britons said they did not care about the upcoming coronation, according to a recent YouGov poll, while 48% said they were unlikely to take part in coronation celebrations. The leaders of Australia and New Zealand will pledge their allegiance to King Charles at his coronation in London on Saturday, even though both are lifelong Republicans who do not shy away from making their positions clear. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese and his New Zealand counterpart, Chris Hipkins, have travelled to London, where they are due to meet Prime Minister Rishi Sunak today, although they met the King earlier in the week. Australia held a referendum in 1999 on becoming a republic, with 55% of voters opposed. Polls in recent years have shown varying support for a republic, with most showing a small majority of Australians in favour. Although neither Albanese nor Hipkins are actively campaigning for the British monarch to be replaced as head of state, despite their Republican conviction. Albanese made it clear it doesn't mean that the institution cannot be respected, as is the system of government they have. Albanese said he would take the oath of allegiance to King Charles at the ceremony. King Charles is head of state in Australia, New Zealand, and 12 other Commonwealth realms outside the United Kingdom, although the role is largely ceremonial. The two countries are holding events to celebrate the coronation, from tree planting to military flypasts, though there is expected to be less pageantry than after the death of Queen Elizabeth last year. The late King's death reignited debate in Australia about the need to return a distant constitutional monarchy. Prince Harry would take the 24-hour trip to London for the coronation, while his wife, Meghan Markle, stays back in California.
And Harry will be in row 5, 6, 7, nowhere near his brother or his father. There's no chance for reconciliation during the coronation. There isn't time, and this isn't the time and place. This is the King's Day.
Some South Africans are calling for Britain to return the world's largest diamond, known as the Star of Africa, which is set in the royal scepter that King Charles III will hold at his coronation on Saturday, while others said they didn't feel strongly about it. The diamond, which weighs 530 carats, was discovered in South Africa in 1905 and presented to the British monarchy by the colonial government in the country, which was then under British rule. Temi Tokbe, Ajijola Oluola, Western Spring Television News.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative losses mount in the local election as key battleground results come in. Voters are punishing the Tories after a year of political scandals, surging inflation, and stagnant economic growth. While governing parties often struggle at midterm elections, the council results in England are the largest and last test of voters' sentiments before next year's general election. As it stands, Labour Party has won 1,356 seats, with the Conservative winning 1,028, while the Liberal Democratic gained 761 seats. Earlier, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said despite the result, he was going to keep on carrying out the promises he made to the people.
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors, their friends, their colleagues, and I'm so grateful to them for everything that they've done. In terms of the results, it's still early. We've just had a quarter of the results in. But what I am going to carry on doing is delivering on the people's priorities. Halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists, and stopping the boats. That's what people want us to do. That's what I'm going to keep hard at doing.
Now, the ex-Conservative leader of Medway Council blamed the unpopularity of your government, cost of living plans, the planning changes, NHS failings. That's all down to you. A clear message from voters. What's going to change?
Look, as I said, we've only had a quarter of the results in. Actually, we're making progress in key election battlegrounds like Peterborough, Bassetlaw, Sandwell. But the message I am hearing from people tonight is that they want us to focus on their priorities and they want us to deliver for them. And that's about halving inflation, growing the economy, reducing debt, cutting waiting lists, and stopping the boats.
And elsewhere in Europe, Serbian police this morning arrested a gunman suspected of killing 8 people and wounding 14 others in a village near Belgrade in the second mass shooting in the country this week. According to the Serbian Interior Ministry, the suspect, UB, born in 2002, was apprehended in the vicinity of the city Kragujevac. The ministry in a statement said the suspect is believed to have killed 8 people and wounded 14 overnight, adding that investigation was ongoing. Serbia's President Aleksandar Vučić has deployed yesterday's terrorist attack and proposed top new gun controls. The president further promised justice, stating that the monsters will never see the light of day. The shooting in the village of Dubona near the town of Mladenovac, 26 miles south of Belgrade, was the second in the Balkan country in just 2 days. A Ukrainian delegate has punched a Russian delegate in the face during a meeting of Black Sea nations after his Ukrainian flag was snatched away to stop him from photobombing a video interview. Alexander Marikovisky posted a video of himself thumping the Russian and retrieving the blue and yellow flag on his Facebook page yesterday. The incident in Turkey took place in a hallway of the Parliament building in Ankara, where the organization of the Black Sea Economic Cooperation Assembly was being held. Earlier in the day, some Ukrainian delegates scuffled with security officers who tried to pull them away as they staged a protest, shouting and holding their flags next to Russia's lead delegate as she tried to address the assembly. You're watching Spring Global on Western Spring Television. We'll be right back after this break.
Ahmadu Bello, Prince Royal, was born 6th of December 1910 at Raba Village, Sokoto, northwestern Nigeria. His father was a district head and heir apparent to the Sultanate throne from the house of Usmanu Danfodio, a religious and social reformer who brought the Habib dynasty under the Fulani Caliphate in the beginning of the 19th century. Ahmadu Bello raised the bar of political consciousness and participation when, in 1944, he engineered the establishment of the Northern People's Congress (NPC) as the first political party in northern Nigeria and the rallying point for politicians in the region before independence. History will not forget Ahmadu Bello for his charisma and political sagacity, which provided easy passage for his kinsmen to assume political and administrative positions in Nigeria's post-independence era. The distinguished elder statesman and Sardauna of Sokoto has his face on his country's 200 naira currency as a mark of honor to one of the architects of Nigeria's independence. Western Spring Television identifies Ahmadu Bello as a watershed character in history.
Thank you for staying with us. Welcome back. Moving over to more news. The World Health Organization, WHO, has declared that COVID-19 no longer represents a global health emergency. The statement represents major steps towards ending the pandemic and comes 3 years after it first declared its highest level of alert over the virus. Officials said the virus death rate had dropped from a peak of more than 100,000 people per week in January 2021 to just over 3,500 on the 24th of April. The head of the WHO, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, said at least 7 million people died in the pandemic, but warned that the true figure was likely closer to 20 million deaths, nearly 3 times the official estimate. The World Health Organization first declared the so-called public health emergency of international concern in January 2020.
Yesterday, the emergency committee met for the 15th time and recommended to me that I declare an end to the public health emergency of international concern. I have accepted that advice. It's therefore with great hope that I declare COVID-19 over as a global health emergency. However, that does not mean COVID-19 is over as a global health threat.
And away from health matters, Australian Prime Minister Tony Albanese has expressed frustration at the United States' continued efforts to extradite WikiLeaks founder and Australian citizen Julian Assange, who has been in a high-security United Kingdom prison for the past 4 years as he fights the case. Mr. Albanese, who is in the UK for King Charles III's coronation, said he was frustrated there had not been a diplomatic resolution to the issue. Mr. Albanese, in an interview with the ABC this morning, said there is nothing to be served by his ongoing incarceration. Mr. Albanese stated that Mr. Assange's case had to be examined in terms of whether the time he had served was more than a reasonable sentence if the allegations against him were proved.
And I am concerned about Mr. Assange's mental health. There was a court decision here in the United Kingdom that was then overturned on appeal that went to Mr. Assange's health as well, and I am concerned for him. And I continue to say in private what I said publicly as Labor leader and what I've said as Prime Minister, that enough is enough. This needs to be brought to a conclusion. It needs to be worked through, including we're working through diplomatic channels, but we're making very clear what our position is on Mr. Assange.
In Asia, 5 Indian soldiers have been killed and several wounded during what the army said was an operation against armed groups in Kashmir. According to the army, forces launched various operations in the Rajouri sector of the Himalayan region after unidentified shooters last month opened fire at an Indian army vehicle, killing at least 5 soldiers. In a statement, the army said a search team this morning encountered a group of fighters trapped in an area that was thickly vegetated with rocky and steep cliffs. It noted that the terrorists triggered an explosive device in retaliation. It added that 2 soldiers died in the attack and another 3 succumbed to their injuries later in the day. Kashmir is claimed in full but ruled in part by nuclear-armed neighbors India and Pakistan. A magnitude 6.3 earthquake struck Japan's central Ishikawa region today, but no tsunami warning was issued. According to the Japan Meteorological Agency, the quake hit at 2:42 p.m. local time at a depth of 10 kilometers. The Japanese railway suspended the Shinkansen bullet train between Nagano and Kanazawa, a popular tourist site. The quake registered an upper 6 of the Japanese Shindo scale of up to 7 in Suzu City, Ishikawa, meaning it could cause major landslides. The U.S. Geological Survey put the magnitude of the quake at 6.2. And still in Asia, A Rohingya refugee delegation has arrived in Myanmar to tour new facilities built for the revival of a long-stalled plan to return the persecuted minority to their homeland. Bangladesh officials said this morning that 20 Rohingya and 7 officials, including a border guard officer, were visiting 2 model villages erected for the pilot return project. Bangladesh Deputy Refugee Commissioner Mohammed Khalid Hussain confirmed that development this morning. Bangladesh is home to about 1 million Rohingya, most of whom fled a 2017 military crackdown in neighboring Myanmar that is now subject to a UN genocide investigation. Both countries signed an agreement to return the refugee later that year, but little progress was being made since. Meanwhile, Miami's military has commuted the death sentences of 38 people as part of this week's amnesty for more than 2,000 political prisoners. In a brief statement published this afternoon, state-run Global New Light of Myanmar, the country's Human Rights Commission said it was deeply delighted at the decision to commute the death sentences to life imprisonment and also at the release of those jailed for opposing the coup. The statement said the commission hoped that similar positive steps will be continued in future. It did not elaborate on the circumstances of the prisoners who had their sentences commuted. Myanmar's military, which seized power from the elected government in February 2021, has used brutal force against those opposed to its rule in a fruitless attempt to quell mass protests that have evolved into an armed uprising. Moving on, Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. says granting U.S. access to Philippine military bases was a defensive step that will be useful if China attacked Taiwan. Mr. Marcos Mahdi, thus known, said this at the end of a 4-day visit to Washington that included a summit with President Joe Biden and an agreement to update the country's nearly 72 years defensive alliance. He, however, did not respond directly when asked whether the United States could place weapons at the bases if China attacked Taiwan. Marcos told Reuters that the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement reached with the United States in 2014 was originally conceived to improve disasters responses. In other news, Adidas reported a hefty first quarter loss this morning as it split with the controversial U.S. rapper Kanye West dragged down the German sportswear giant bottom line. The company booked a net loss of 39 million euros from January to March, compared to a profit of 482 million euros in the period a year earlier. Its operating profit came in at 60 million euros, a fall of more than 85% from a year earlier, while sales were almost flat at 5.28 billion euros. However, the company suffered 400 million euros in lost earnings related to ending the production and sale of its highly successful Yeezy line designed in collaboration with West. And talking sports, Leeds United interim manager Sam Allardyce has said the club will have to produce their best defensive performance of the season if they hope to take points off Manchester City. Allardyce was hired on Wednesday in a desperate attempt to avert relegation after the Yorkshire club sacked Javi Gracia. Leeds are in 17th place outside the drop zone on goal difference and have taken 1 point from their last 5 games. He faces a stern test in his first game in charge on Saturday at City, who lead the table by a point with a game in hand over second place Arsenal. The 68-year-old Allardyce, who had never been relegated until taking West Bromwich Albion down in his first top-flight job, said he hopes his side can find a space or two to cause City some problems.
I don't ever see a problem in training because there's no real pressure there like there is in the game. So with the goalkeeper coach working with him, there's nothing you can see to suggest or say anything other than you look at him and he does like all the keepers do together. They go through the routine. You know, they are a bit daft, a bit mad, aren't they? Because they love doing what they do. And if you did that for a player, that the outfield player would get really bored, but the goalkeepers love it. So, and they're right good pack together, aren't they? You know what I mean? They're like a little family of their own. So that will help him, hopefully. But you know, that for me lies to be one of the probably the biggest decisions I have to make today.
Before we end Spring Global, here is a recap of our top stories. A judge at the UK Central Criminal Court, also known as the Old Bailey, has sentenced former Deputy Senate President Ike Ekweremadu, his wife Beatrice, and Dr. Obinna Obeta to jail. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative losses mount in the local election as key battleground results come in. The World Health Organization, WHO, has declared that COVID-19 no longer represents a global health emergency. You can follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Western Spring Television. You can also watch us live on our YouTube channel at Western Spring Television. I am Tunde Ido. Good evening.